Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at one of the more serious ideas in crypto right now, and that is the push to tokenize real-world commodities, especially precious metals and strategic materials. On the surface, it sounds simple enough. Take something valuable in the real world, like gold, silver, platinum, uranium, copper, or rare earth elements, put it on the blockchain, and suddenly anybody can buy a piece of it, trade it around the clock, and hold exposure to something physical without all the usual friction. That is the sales pitch. It sounds efficient, modern, and almost inevitable. But once you get past the headline, you start to realize this is one of those stories where the real truth is hiding underneath the structure. Because the token itself is actually the easy part. The hard part is everything underneath it. Who owns the metal? Where is it stored? Who audits it? What rights does the holder actually have? Can they redeem it? And if the whole thing gets stress tested, who is left standing and who is left holding a digital promise that might not be worth what they thought? Before we get into it, this episode is sponsored by Kraken, and for a limited time, we are giving away 20 XRP to anyone that signs up using our link below. So if you have been thinking about joining the market, or you want to use a platform that a lot of serious crypto investors already trust, check out Kraken through our link in the description and get yourself in the mix. Now, the reason this idea is getting attention is because some people in the space are no longer trying to sell the world on abstract crypto for the sake of crypto. They are looking at what blockchains are actually good at. Blockchains are very good at tracking ownership, enabling transfer, improving accessibility, and keeping a record that can move instantly across borders. That is why the idea of bringing commodities on chain sounds so appealing. Traditional commodities markets can be messy. Some are hard for normal investors to access. Some are locked up behind brokers, funds, institutions, and specialist infrastructure. Some settle slowly. Some are expensive to enter. Some barely have a clean retail market at all. So when somebody comes along and says, "Why not bring the periodic table on chain? Why not make these assets fractional, portable, and tradable 24 hours a day?" it immediately grabs attention, especially in a market that is desperate for real utility. And I can see why people get excited. If you could buy a small amount of vaulted gold, or a slice of silver, or exposure to strategic metals with the same ease as buying a crypto token, that could open the door to a whole new class of investor. Instead of needing large amounts of capital, specialist custody arrangements, or exposure through a mining stock, you could potentially buy the asset itself, or at least an interest in it, through a much more flexible system. That sounds powerful. It sounds democratic. It sounds like the kind of thing crypto was supposed to do from the beginning. But the deeper you go into this model, the more obvious it becomes that this is not really a story about technology. It is a story about trust. More specifically, it is a story about where trust sits, who controls it, and whether the blockchain actually removes any of the traditional weaknesses or just rearranges them. Because here's the thing people get wrong. When they hear tokenized gold or tokenized metal, they instinctively think they own metal. They think the token is just a digital key to something real sitting in a vault somewhere. But that is not always how these structures work in practice. Sometimes what you own is not the metal itself. Sometimes you own a beneficial interest. Sometimes you own a claim against an issuer. Sometimes you own a right under a trust arrangement. Sometimes you are relying on a custodian, a legal wrapper, a registry, and a redemption process that all have to function perfectly together. That means your so-called ownership can be much more complicated than the marketing suggests. And that is the first major problem with this whole sector. The blockchain might show that you hold a token? Fine. But what exactly does that token entitle you to? Does it give you legal title to a specific allocated piece of metal? Or does it simply give you economic exposure? Is the metal ring-fenced from the issuer if something goes wrong? If the company behind the token gets into trouble, are holders protected, or do they become unsecured claimants in a legal mess? That is the question that separates a serious product from a dangerous one. Because if the answer is vague, then all the slick blockchain language in the world does not help you. This is why I think tokenized commodities are one of the most misunderstood corners of the market. People assume the magic is in the token. It is not. The token is the wrapper. The real product is the custody chain, the legal documentation, the reconciliation system, the audit trail, and the redemption rules. If those are strong, the token can be useful. If those are weak, the token is just a digital costume on top of old risks. Let's take redemption, because this is where the fantasy usually starts to crack. A lot of people imagine that if they buy a token tied to a precious metal, they can always convert that token into the real thing. But in practice, redemption can be limited, delayed, expensive, restricted by jurisdiction, or only available through approved channels. In some cases, it might be possible in theory but difficult in reality. And that matters, because if holders cannot redeem efficiently, then the token stops behaving like direct ownership and starts behaving more like a synthetic proxy. Again, that is not automatically bad. Plenty of investors are happy with exposure rather than physical delivery. But it means the product is different from what many buyers assume. And then we come to liquidity, which is another thing people overestimate. Just because you tokenize an asset does not mean you have built a real market for it. A token can exist on-chain and still trade in a very thin, fragile, unreliable way. That means pricing can drift away from the value of the underlying asset. Spreads can widen. Exits can become harder than expected. And in a moment of panic, the whole thing can be tested in a way that glossy launch materials never really account for. This is especially important when you move beyond something like gold into more niche materials. The less developed the market, the more you are relying on confidence, structure, and participation to hold the thing together. That is why I actually think the precious metals angle is more realistic than the broader dream of throwing the entire periodic table on-chain overnight. Gold and silver at least have deep cultural recognition, simpler consumer understanding, and existing demand as stores of value. People know what gold is. They know why it matters. They understand the idea of holding it. But once you move into uranium, lithium, cobalt, or rare earth elements, things become much more complicated. These are industrial materials. They have different grades, different storage requirements, different regulatory constraints, different transportation rules, and different market structures. So while the slogan of tokenizing everything sounds futuristic, the practical challenge gets much harder the further you move away from straightforward vaulted bullion. What makes this more interesting is when you stop talking about the periodic table on chain as a slogan and start looking at how ordinary people or businesses would actually use it. Gold is the easiest example because the use case is already obvious. Somebody in a country with a weak currency could buy tokenized gold on a phone instead of trying to source coins or bars. A trader could move in and out of gold exposure 24 hours a day without waiting for an ETF market to open. A treasury desk or crypto-native fund could park part of its capital in tokenized gold as a defensive asset without fully leaving the blockchain ecosystem. And in theory, a person could hold gold exposure in a wallet, post it as collateral, borrow against it, or move it across borders faster than they could move physical bullion. That is the real-world appeal. It is not that blockchain makes gold magical. It is that it makes access, transfer, and flexibility easier for people who would never touch a vault directly. And yes, some gold already is tokenized on a one-to-one basis, but the details matter. Products like Pax Gold are designed so that one token represents one fine troy ounce of gold. Other tokenized gold products work on similar principles, with the token linked to a specific quantity of physical gold held in custody. On paper, that sounds exactly like what people want. You buy the token, you own exposure to real gold, and the system keeps track of the underlying metal. Some providers even let holders see the bar details tied to their holdings, which makes it feel much more tangible. But this is exactly where you need to slow down. One token representing 1 ounce does not automatically mean you can tap a button and have a gold bar delivered to your house tomorrow morning. Redemption usually comes with conditions. You may need to complete verification. There may be minimum redemption sizes. There may be location restrictions, transport costs, insurance issues, and fees that make small redemptions impractical. Some platforms make physical redemption easier for larger or institutional holders than for ordinary retail users. So when a company says the token is backed one-to-one, that is important. But it is not the same thing as saying frictionless physical delivery is available to everyone in every situation. A much more realistic everyday example is this. Say somebody wants to protect savings from inflation, but they do not want the hassle of buying coins, paying a dealer premium, arranging storage, and worrying about theft. Tokenized gold gives that person a simpler route. They can buy gold exposure in smaller pieces, hold it digitally, and sell it quickly if they need cash. That is a clear use case. Another example would be a crypto trader who has made profits in a volatile market and wants to rotate part of that capital into something defensive without fully cashing out into a bank account. Instead of moving into dollars and leaving the on-chain world, they could move into tokenized gold. Another would be a business or investor in an unstable region that wants access to a globally recognized store of value without relying entirely on local banking infrastructure. Those are real-world cases people can actually picture. That is why gold and silver make more sense than the bigger fantasy assets people talk about. The public already understands what they are buying. The store of value narrative already exists. The custody model is easier to explain. The unit is easier to standardize. With uranium, lithium, cobalt, or rare earths, the situation gets much messier very quickly. Those markets are more industrial. The materials come in different forms and grades. Storage is more specialized. Transport is more complex. Regulation is tighter. In some cases, the asset is not something an ordinary person would ever realistically redeem or take delivery of anyway. So the further you get from straightforward vaulted bullion, the more this becomes a niche market for sophisticated players, rather than something you will instantly understand. And that is the key point. Tokenized precious metals work best when they solve a real access problem. They are strongest when they let someone buy, hold, move, or use gold more easily than they could through traditional channels. But the product only stays credible if the backing is real, the custody is trusted, and the redemption process is clear. Otherwise, the investor is not really holding digital gold. They are holding a digital promise about gold. And those are not the same thing at all. If you want to go deeper into the crypto market, make sure you check out Kraken through the link below. And for the full breakdowns every day, head over to the podcast. As always, we'll see you at the top.